What's up, YouTube? This is Too Raw for TV. So, when we were growing up, right, in the 80s and 90s, and if you watched the NBA back when they did a much better job of promoting the history of the league and teaching us youngsters about some of the all-time greats, there's certain players that they talked about more than others. There's certain players that stood out in their history. You know, you heard about Magic and Larry, who was still playing at that time when I was watching basketball. A young Jordan they talked about, but but more than him, they talked about the Julius Irvings and the Wilt Chamberlains and Kareem, who had just retired at that time. And they talked about Jerry West and Oscar Robertson, Elgin Baylor. These were the all-time greats. Even Rick Barry got more love back then than he does now. But when it comes to Bill Russell, there were always some interesting terms used about him. You would hear he's the greatest teammate that a team ever had. He was the ultimate winner in sports. You would hear terms like that. And they made a lot of the 11 titles in 13 years. And, that was, a lot of what people focused on. And of course, when it came to his nemesis, Wilt Chamberlain, the argument was more about his production, his singular offensive production, and just production overall as a player. So then the debate was what's more important, the titles or the production? A lot of people tell you, well, the ultimate goal is win a championship, so that makes Bill Russell better. But then, of course, you have all these other arguments. Me personally, I tend to think Bill Russell's overrated. Now, at one point in time, I did have Bill Russell in my top 10 overall players list. But that was more out of deference. That was more out of respect for him as a player. A lot of it had to do with his off the court, activities, a civil rights activist, and just because of the championship, you just felt like you were obligated to put him in the top 10. But when it comes down to it, is he really a top 10 player? And it's he's an interesting case. It's hard to argue against a guy not not being top 10, or argue for a guy, excuse me, not being top 10 when he has 11 championships. It's hard. So then you have to say, well, look, I'm not saying he wasn't great. Overrated does not mean suck. Some people tend to equate that, and that's not what I'm saying, at least. He was a great player, just not as great as people make him out to be. Um, let's look at the championships, okay? They mean a lot. But let's be honest. It was a league that had 8 teams at one point. I think toward the end, his last years, it was 14 teams. So 8 to 14 teams. There might have been, I think, a couple of years where he was playing where it was 17 teams, but a lot of those franchises folded over time. So I think at most there were 17 teams, but generally, I think when he first came to the league, it was 8 teams. When he finished, it was 14. Now, you could argue this, and this is an argument. Some will tell you, well, with fewer teams, there's less dilution of talent. So, therefore, you have a more competitive league. That's an argument to be made, okay? Because some people say, well, there's only 8 teams and yada, yada, yada. So the odds of him winning a title were greater. That's true. That's very true, especially when you have the same team together as long as they did. Free agency wasn't a thing back then. It didn't start until the 70s. Okay, so it was easier for the Boston Celtics organization to keep all these guys together for such a long period of time. It's almost impossible to do now. But this is the thing, though. Imagine if right now 22 franchises just folded. They just folded. And all you have are the Knicks, the Heat, the Lakers, Clippers, the Bucks, let's say Brooklyn, Dallas, and let's say the Bulls, right? Everybody else folded. So where is Donovan Mitchell going to go? Where is Dame Lillard going to go? Where is McCollum going to go? Where is Trae Young going to go? Where are all these players going to go? They're going to get picked up somewhere. It's the lesser players that are going to get removed from the NBA. And now all of a sudden, you legitimately would have super teams. Every team is a super duper team with 4 or 5 Hall of Famers. So that's one way of looking at this now. When you make the argument about, well, it was only 8 teams. Well, that means you was playing a Hall of Fame player at that position every day, every game, I should say. So that's one way of looking at it. Now, on the other end, like I said before, you could say, well, the odds are that Boston, by not having as much competition, the odds of them winning a title a little bit greater because it's only 7 teams opposing you. With hell, half of them being in the other conference, so your odds of going to the finals are greater. So that's different ways of looking at that. Now, what does count against Bill Russell, in my opinion, is there were fewer games played. In fact, some of those years, Bill Russell and the Boston Celtics had byes. They didn't even play in the first round. And they went directly to the Eastern Conference Finals, or the equivalency thereof, and then went into the finals. There were fewer rounds back then. It wasn't an opening round and semis and conference and then finals. Oftentimes it was, I guess if they did play the first round, it's a best of 2 or 1 game elimination. And then they would go right to the finals or the equivalency of that, uh, and then to the finals. So yeah, it was a little bit easier path. So some of those things are true. He did have Hall of Fame talent played with him. Altogether, Bill Russell played with 12 Hall of Famers during his career. Although it can be stated that some of them are Hall of Famers based more upon the championship they won. But definitely guys like Tom Heinsohn, guys like Sam Jones, guys like John Havlicek, guys like Tom Sanders, guys like uh, Bob Cousy, guys like Bill Sharman. There's no doubt about it, Hall of Famers. So he played with a lot of great players over the course of his career. Not to mention, uh, they even got to play with some other guys who eventually signed on with Boston later on in their careers, including a guy like Bailey Howell, who was a former rookie of the year. They did play with some guys, Clyde Loveland, who I believe is in the Hall of Fame. So they did have a lot of, and then attracted some guys who go on to play with Boston. So he played with a lot of talent there. Let's focus on Bill Russell himself right now, okay? There's this myth, this often repeated, retreaded, and regurgitated talking point, which is so fallacious and so full of holes. It's ridiculous. That Bill Russell played against a bunch of 6'4" white guys. Poppycock. Yeah, you just heard a black dude say that. That's poppycock. That's bollocks. Look, if you're talking, I think sometimes people think of the Joe Folks, Max Sosowski, Brad Davis, Brad Davies, uh, uh, Dolph Shays earlier years. They think of the late '40s NBA as being the same as the league that Bill Russell and Will Chamberlain played in. By that time, the leagues had changed so much for the better, it was ridiculous. The shot clock had been instituted. Offenses were better. Offenses were more complex by that time. You didn't have a whole bunch of flat-footed uh, dudes who really. Back then, the NBA was it was primal back in the '40s and early '50s. But there had been so many advances by the late '50s that it was mimicking, not mimicking, but it was pretty much the blueprint of modern day basketball by the late 1950s. The game had improved so much. If you look at any existing footage of an NBA game from 1947, and then you look at the NBA game in 1957, it's night and day. It's literally night and day. And that's why so many of those guys that played and I'll tell you this, so many of the players who were stars in 1950 were out of the league by 1957 because the game had advanced so much in such a short period of time. Or the guys who were stars, superstars, I guess the equivalency back in 1951, like George Mikan. He was out the league by 1956. That's not a knock on Mikan, but the game had advanced so much that he couldn't play in that NBA. It was a faster paced game. It wasn't a slow, bogged down, football style basketball that they were playing in the '40s and '50s. But back to this thing about Bill Russell only playing against a bunch of midgets. Um, Look, there was some truth to that. If you go back to the small pro leagues they had back in the '30s and '20s and '40s, there was this prevailing notion that uh, you know a big man was uncoordinated and he couldn't excel in basketball, which sounds absolute like tomfoolery right now, right? But that was the prevailing notion until George Mikan killed that. George Mikan with the Paul, 6'10", 245, 250 pounds, was so dominant in college, winning so many NIT championships, at least one, I think, 1945, I believe, that they had to uh, institute goaltending in college because of George Mikan. Now, I said this before, look, the league average right now for height and weight is 6'6" and 216 pounds. A couple of years ago, 4 years ago or so, it was 6'7" and 224 pounds. Now, one of the reasons why that shrunk a little bit is because guys like Oliver Miller, the guys like Kevin Duckworth, guys like Prime Shaq with 350, 60, 350, 360, 380 pounds, uh, you know, guys like George Muresan, they couldn't exist in today's NBA. They couldn't flourish. They're too big. Now, I'm not saying that you don't have more skilled guys, and you do have guys today who are 7 feet and can do all these wonderful things with the basketball, but they're also not 280 pounds. They're smaller frame. Uh, what's his face? With the Dallas Mavericks, Kristaps Porzingis. He's 7'3". I would be shocked if he's more than 250 pounds. Yao Ming was 310 pounds. Arvydas Sabonis in his prime was 275. By the time he got in the league, he was about 300 pounds. Different pace NBA back then. Bill Russell, when he first came into the NBA in 1956-57, the league average was 6'5" and 201 pounds. That's only 1 inch shorter and it's about 15 pounds lighter than today. His last year in the NBA, 1968-69 season, the average height was 6'6" and 200, and the weight was 207. The exact same height as today, and the weight is about 9 pounds lighter. So the size disparity thing, it's a myth. It's not really true. Between 1960 and 1973, right, which would incorporate most of Bill Russell's career and all of Will Chamberlain's career, the number of players that I'm going to name right now were at least 6'11", at least 6'11". William Smith, 7 feet tall. George Johnson, 6'11". Vic Bartolome, 7 feet. LaRue Martin, 6'11". Craig Spitzer, 7 feet. Greg Fillmore, 7'1". Tom Payne, 7'2". Walt Wesley, 6'11". Nate Thurman, 6'11", Hall of Famer, of course. Ronald Taylor, 7'1". Chuck Shears, 6'11". Elmore Smith, 7 feet tall. Craig Raymond, 6'11". Billy Paultz, 6'11". Rich Neiman, 7 feet. Dave Newmark, 7 feet. Otto Moore, 6'11". Jim McDaniel, 6'11". Bob Lanier, 6'11", Hall of Famer. Reggie Harding, 7 feet. Sweet Holbrook, 7'3". Artis Gilmore, 7'2", Hall of Famer. Hank Finkel, 7 feet. Ray Felix, 6'11". Jim Eakins, 6'11". Walter Dukes, 7 feet. Mel Count, 7 feet. Nate Bowman, 6'11". Tom Burwinkle, 7 feet. Walt Bellamy, 6'11", Hall of Famer. Dennis Altray, 6'11". Of course, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, 6'2", 7'2", Hall of Fame. I was getting a call. I'll have to answer them a little bit later on. Where is my mind? Where is my mind? I like that damn song. But that's like 30 guys I just named. In the league that was what? Between 8 and I think at the end 17 teams. That's 30 something guys. But there's supposed to be only one or two guys that's 6'10". Where's all these 6'4" white centers? There's none. It's bullshit. It's a lie. It's a lie to just denigrate an entire era. Now I'm not saying that these guys were as skilled, the league was the same as it was. No, I'm not saying that. But it was not this league where you had a whole bunch of Al Bundys just drinking, beer and it's bullshit. It's such bullshit. It's not true. There's no doubt in my mind that if you put Bill Russell in today's NBA, he would be very effective. He'd be very effective. With all the switching that they do, remember, Bill Russell was 6 foot. He was listed 6'9", 215. Back then, they measured you barefoot, whereas starting in the late '80s, early '90s, definitely early '90s, up until recently, they listed you in shoes. Now, fuck the Converse, the Chuck Taylors he was wearing back then. You put them in today's shoes, especially the '90s shoes were more cushioned. He'd be listed more like 6'11". And remember, he bulked up to about 240. He was about 240 really. 215 was his college weight when he played for San Francisco, I believe. So he'd be listed about 6'11", 240. He'd be about the same size as say Lajuan, maybe Robert Parrish. He would be a decent sized center who could play in today's NBA. He had the physique to play and the energy to play in today's NBA. Remember, this is a guy that played in the fastest pace in the history of the NBA, even faster than today's pace. These guys ran up and down the court all day. That's why it's absurd when someone say that Will Chamberlain couldn't play in today's pace. He played in a faster pace. Bill Russell averaged 22.5 rebounds for his career, the second highest average next to Will. When you look at per minutes, he has the highest rebound per rate minute in the history of the NBA. because Wilt averaged 45 minutes a game. Wilt uh, Wilt averaged 45 minutes a game. Bill Russell averaged 42, I think, and a half or something like that. So these guys could play heavy minutes, and all of the switching when you need versatility for a defender. This is a guy, Bill Russell, in his prime that could guard the 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. So he'd be a very effective guy in today's NBA. Graceful, agile, super athletic. Uh, Before he was drafted, he was the seventh ranked high jumper in the world. Had a vertical leap of over 40 inches. So I think when people say things like, "Well, he wouldn't be better than Dale Davis," I think you really, really, really are capping there. You know, you really need to do a little bit more research when it comes to Bill Russell. Now, like I said, I'm not saying he's a top 10 player. I don't have him top 10, but he was a very effective guy. He changed the perceptions of that team, and he altered that team he made them a champion. He made them a dynasty team. Remember, Ben Wallace wasn't even drafted. He's the first. Ben Wallace, I believe, somebody might have to fact check me, but I think Ben Wallace is going to be the first undrafted Hall of Famer. Now, maybe there's someone else that I'm missing. No, I think I'm missing somebody. I think there's somebody else that's in the Hall of Fame that's undrafted, but he's either the first or the second. Ben Wallace didn't give you points, couldn't shoot. He was a horrible foul shooter, 42% for his career, I think. But what he gave you was such a dominant defensive presence. He altered the culture of the Detroit Pistons. They won a championship. They could have won two back to back if Joe Dumars had made the right move and picked Carmelo Anthony instead of Darko Milicic. They could have had a real mini dynasty there in Detroit. Bill Russell, before he got to Boston, they were not a championship level team. They were a good team. They had a great backcourt in Bob Cousy and Bill Sharman, but what they lacked was defense, a defensive presence down low, and rebounding. That's why most of Bob Cousy's triple doubles came before Bill Russell was arrived there. Once he arrived there, they instantly became a dynasty. Bill Russell was also a victim of racism. And this is why I say this. Bill Russell should have won Rookie of the Year in 1956-57. They gave it to Tom Heinsohn. Tom Heinsohn was a great player, but they should have given it to Bill Russell. If there was such thing as Finals MVP back then, Bill Russell would have eclipsed Michael Jordan's record of 6 Finals MVPs. He probably would have had. I'm not saying he would have won it every year, because some of those years they would have given it to John Havlicek or some other guy, maybe Sam Jones. But I think he would have had at least 7 or 8 Finals MVPs. Bill Russell. They instituted the all defensive team the last year Bill Russell was there. And at age 35, he was on the first team all defense. He would have been there every fucking year he played. So Bill Russell would have been 13-time all in a defensive player. Okay, if that existed when he played. Blocks we don't know about, but I do know this. He and Wilt would have been number 1 and number 2 all time in blocks if that stat was counted from the time the league started in 1946. Bill Russell was not a great scorer. That's his Achilles heel. He was not a great scoring big man. Um, his field goal percentage of 44%. I can't explain that one away. The only thing I can think of is this is just from watching some of his games. Moses Malone did this, but I think Moses did it more and perhaps more effectively. Sometimes a player who was smart like he was, they would purposely throw up a bad shot to get better position on the rebound to put up a better shot. Moses did it a lot. Moses was such a great offensive rebounder. Bill Russell, they didn't count offensive and defensive rebounds back then. Bill Russell was known for dominating defensive boards, but I wouldn't be surprised if Bill Russell did that a little bit more than I thought he did. I've seen some games with him doing that. And, what I mean by that is it looked like he's putting up a bad shot, but in reality, he might have been just throwing the ball off the backboard to himself to get a better shot. That might contribute to his low percentage as far as overall shooting. He wasn't a great offensive player. He just wasn't. He was not. And that's a weakness of his. He wasn't a good foul shooter. People get on Wilt for 51%, but Bill Russell wasn't much better at 56%. So these are the realities. And I think that's pretty much all I got to say in this video about Bill Russell. Um, is he an all-time great player? Yeah, you have to consider him an all-time great player. Is he as well-rounded as some other guys? No. But his defensive capabilities were endless. High basketball IQ, tenacious, had the same mentality, killer instinct that Kobe and Mike and Bird had. Very high IQ player. When he blocked shots, he didn't want to block him into the third row and beat his chest because, yeah, it looks good aesthetically for a little while, and it looks great, little dominant alpha male play, but you give the ball right back to the defense. Bill Russell would try to tap block. He would try to tap it to a teammate of his. That's something I remember picking up, and I would try to do that myself. Whenever I never played organized basketball, but whenever I was playing, I would do that myself. I would try to tap it to a teammate. By that, not only are you blocking the shot, but you're creating a turnover, and you're also initiating this fast break. These are some of the high IQ plays that Bill Russell would do. You know what I'm saying? Bill Russell was a solid big man. He was a great defender. He was a great rebounder, of course, a great shot blocker. He was a versatile defender. He was a great help defender. He was a great individual defender. And he was also something that gets not talked about. He was also a great passing big man back when that wasn't fashionable. Remember, he was coming into the league in 1956 when you had guys who were just, let's be honest, a lot of the centers back then were plundering, doddering guys. But he was a guy that would go out there and he had a skill set that you didn't see in big men in 1956. Now, of course, Wilt Chamberlain took it to another level, but give Bill Russell his due. Sometimes I think we overdo it with the criticisms of Bill Russell. Tell me what you guys think.